All right. So this is the Padlet. There are the slides, there's videos, there's teaching ideas, and there's research and reference documents. So if you want to go to that on a separate, Kate will put that in the chat. And then if you want to use those or follow along on a different computer or your phone, this is where you get the slides. So if after the presentation, all of the sessions will eventually be in the Padlet. So that's where you would get the information from.
And
All right,
I did send that in the chat. So
I'm sorry?
I sent it in the chat so
Perfect.
people can copy and paste it if they want.
Thank you. So our learning objectives, we're going to understand the Indiana's legal definition of an instructional assistant. We're going to identify the roles and responsibilities of an instructional assistant. We're going to analyze key legal behaviors of an instructional assistant, including confidentiality practices and IEP implementation. So some schools, they call them instructional assistants. Some schools, they call them paraprofessionals. Some schools, they call them IEs. Put it in the chat what they call them at your school. I'm just kind of curious about that. But we are talking about in my school, we said paraprofessionals or an aide, sometimes they would say. I'm not sure what you guys say in your vocabulary at your school. But that is just the language that we're going to use today. So we're going to talk about the legal part of it and some of the roles that the paraprofessionals do have. So the definition, a paraprofessional, and like I said, an aide, assistant, a paraeducator, an IA. Is there anything else in the chat that's different, or that's pretty much one of these? It's in
a lot of IAs.
A lot of IAs. Okay, that's interesting. Katie, what did you call them at your school? IA?
Yeah, I think we call them IAs too.
Okay. Yeah, we call them a para or sometimes an aide. Is an educational professional who is usually not licensed to teach, but performs many duties both individually with students and organizationally in the classroom. I had 3 paraprofessionals in my classroom. I did teach in a classroom with students in life skills. I also co-taught in a class with students with learning disabilities. So I was able to work with many different paraprofessionals as a special educator. So that is the definition of what a paraprofessional is. Article 7 is Indiana's special education law. So if you didn't know, if it says Article 7 information, there's a federal law and every state has a different law. So Article 7 is Indiana's law. So this is what a paraprofessional is defined in the law. So you can dazzle your friends if they want to know the actual definition of the law. But a paraprofessional is an individual who works under the supervision and directions of a licensed teacher or related services personnel to assist in areas that relate to personal, social, and instructional needs. The team includes, but is not limited to, the following. So instructional or program assistants, school bus monitors, interpreters, note takers, and job coaches. So this is Article 7, and again, Article 7 is what Indiana calls the special education law. So if you ever hear that word Article 7, I just think that that's a good frame of reference, because I did not know what that was when I first started teaching. I was like, wait, what do you mean? Until I got into all the classrooms and people would say, well, according to Article 7, this is happening. So I just want you guys to know that that's where it's from. So Indiana has Article 7, that's the law of our state. And that is what its definition is in the law. So that is the different kinds of paraprofessionals that we could have. And there could be more, which I'm going to ask you in a second. So for you guys, can you use the chat and tell me what your role, your current instructional assistant role is in Indiana, and type your answer in the chat box for me. I had, like I said, I had 3 paraprofessionals that helped me in my classroom. They were with my students with a life skills program. I taught students with autism. So those were mine in there, and that was their role. They were with me to help me with my students with autism. They also helped me take them to different classes in the general education as much as possible and did things like that. So Katie, I'm gonna let you kind of read those off for me.
Yeah, for sure. So we have one who's a blind, low vision instructional assistant, which kind of rare to have those. That's awesome. Math interventions, some push in and pull out support, resource support, algebra, IA, and then just general support within the classroom. Some for pull out for direct instruction in the resource room, life skills, functional, instructional assistant,
Awesome.
push
So it looks
into
like, and
the adult skills, sorry.
an adult skills, great. So the 18 to 22-year-old program possibly, that's awesome. So yeah, so anybody that's a paraprofessional, and we kind of hit on all of these, and then I didn't hear any school bus monitors, but there could be an aide or a para in there. You said that the blind, low vision, and so the related services, and it talked about that in the definition. So we definitely have everybody. And in the 18 to 22-year-old program, there are job coaches, and sometimes, and they are also instructional assistants, typically, unless they have a license or something, but that is another place where they are. So thank you guys for that. So we know that we're thinking, when we talk about this, we always say that all students are general education students first. Even my students that had more significant needs, they're general education students first. They receive their special education services at times. So all students must be given access to the general education curriculum and must be educated in the least restrictive environment. If you guys have not heard that before, we start every student, no matter what their need is, in general education. And then the team says, can they do their job? Can they do their work? Can they do that in gen ed without any help? And if they cannot, then we try to say, okay, what if we give them some supports or resources in that general education classroom? Can they make it there then? And then and then if they can't, then that's when we pull them out to maybe a resource class to deliver some instruction. And then if they still can't make it in there, then we would have to move it further on. But we really try to start with that gen ed setting first. What can they do? And then we give them those supports. And if they can't make it in that gen ed setting, then that's when we take them out of the classroom a little bit more, and then they receive more special education services based on their IEP. So paraprofessionals make this happen. I always say that my paraprofessionals were the heartbeat of my classroom. We work together as a team, and I really hope, think about your gen ed teachers that you work with. I really hope that you feel part of the team, because that is really key, I think, to having a good relationship. And I'm sure Katie worked with great IAs also in her classrooms, because they really help you fulfill those kids. We have to increase those outcomes for those students, and our paraprofessionals are essential to our classrooms. I'm going to speak on all teachers because they are. So I appreciate your help and all of that, because I felt that as a special education teacher, I really needed my paraprofessionals to make that happen. So roles of paraprofessionals, and I want you to think about your roles. Sometimes you can transition students to classrooms. You have to have physical support. Maybe students have, needs. They have a wheelchair. They have to access that, and you help them with that. Or maybe they have to feed themselves. They can't feed themselves, and you have to help with that kind of thing. You have behavior and emotional support. There are classrooms that have maybe emotional disability classrooms, and there are paraprofessionals that help with that. They teach those skills for those students to access those coping skills. They need to advocate for themselves to take a break. So the paraprofessional is there for help with that. Organizational support. We know as students in middle school and high school, they can't get organized. They forget to turn in their assignments. So the paraprofessional is really there to just remind them, to give those verbal reminders. Okay, did you hand this in? Let me help you in this resource classroom to organize your binder or organize whatever it is that the students need. A paraprofessional really could help with that. Academic support. Katie said that there was somebody in the math class or algebra support. And we know that algebra is really hard, and those students with maybe learning disabilities or different disabilities have a harder time with those higher classes in math. So the teacher needs that para to help follow up with the instruction after the teacher instruction. So the teacher models the questions, and then the students forgot all of the steps to the problem. So the paraprofessional is so imperative to help with that. I'm going to teach it again in a different way, or I'm going to model it again the way the teacher did, or I'm going to break down those steps. That the paraprofessional is really helpful with those kinds of things. Also monitoring and data collection. My paraprofessionals helped me with this very much, and we're going to go through each how to do that. And I don't know how much you guys do with your data binders, or if you help with goals and like getting progress monitoring information to the teacher. The teacher will put the information in the IEP system, but the paraprofessionals can definitely help collect that data. And then the generalization, that would be that students maybe they can do it in the whole classroom with your help, and then you pull them out to a resource class and they're doing a really good job with the skill. So then they're gonna, when they go back to gen ed the next day, they go back to their classroom, then you kind of step back and you're like, okay, maybe they can do this without my help. That's generalization. The students get the skill without your help, without your verbal cues, without, maybe you used to have to do a verbal cue and now you can just point and then the student remembers your cue. So that would be some of the roles of paraprofessionals, but we know you have many different roles. So if you want to put anything in the chat that you probably help with in here, or something that you help that's not on this list, please do that. So we're going to talk through these things. Katie, and of course I can't see the chat, so I'm going to let you.
You're good. We had somebody say that they collect data every week on students.
That is awesome. That is awesome. We're going to get into that, so I'm probably going to need their help on that one. So decision-making guidelines, they should focus on the needs of the students. So we always try to say, what can the students do on their own? What can they do on their own 100%? And then when they can't do it, what can we do with help? So what can we do with help? Could be a person there. So we think about the types of the needs of the students, the severity and needs of the students, the necessary support. Of course, if a student's not able to feed themselves on their own, then they're going to need a person to help them. So, it just depends on the needs. The setting where the support is needed. Maybe your student needs academic or behavior help, or I'm going to go with behavior first. So students are able to behave maybe in the classrooms because the teachers are there and they're watching them. But when they're on recess, they can't keep their hands to themselves. So they need that para to go outside with them to help remember, they like to watch them because they just need that help with that behavior. So it really is important because students sometimes they can do PE on their own because they're really athletic or they're able to do that. But maybe in math, they are not organized or they don't know how to solve the problems. So they don't need the para to follow them probably all around because you want to know where the students really need that help, and then think about the strengths of the students where they don't need that help. And then monitoring necessarily for success. So we're going to talk through that and look at what data can we collect. So we're like, okay, this student is able to do this. I'm going to step back a little bit as a para, and maybe I can help a different group in the same class. So we're not going to make you get out, you're going to have a job. You're always going to have a job, but there might be some students that'll be able to gain those skills, and then you can kind of help other students that we know that maybe could use some help. So in the Padlet, I'm not going to go through all of these, but if you wanted to, in Article 7, and again, Article 7 is Indiana's law for special education, so that's where it's from. There's a handout in our Padlet, and it talks about the eligibility categories for each criteria for the eligibility categories. It is a 1 page, and I'm too scared to toggle between both of them right now because my computer, so I don't want to do that. But if you want to go to this, it's on the right-hand side. There's a 1 page thing, and it will say, just for an example, it'll say blind, low vision. I know there's somebody, and then it'll talk about the description of the student and how they're eligible for blind, low vision, or we'll say specific learning disability. All the categories that students are able to be eligible for their IEPs are in there. So if you're curious about the different categories, it's kind of a good resource that we made, that the IEPTA Center made. It's kind of quick reference sheet, or it'll say OHI, other health impairment. And if you're not really familiar with that, you can kind of see which one it is if you want to. So that's just something that you could do. It talks about specific conditions, medical, and all of those different things, and the role of paraprofessional related to the student's eligibility needs. Again, it just talks about what does a student with autism, what's maybe a characteristic, and what are some things how are they eligible for it? And it gets into kind of those specific things, but you probably know the students that you have. If you're assigned to one specific student, you probably know all about that category. If you are a classroom paraprofessional or an instructional assistant, this might be helpful to go and look and see all the different categories that kids could have based on their IEP. So it just depends on what you need and what you would like to learn about. So that is in the Padlet, that is in the resource for you to check out. And it's really nice because we did type it up in a 1 page or 1.5 page, and it has a little paragraph under each category that could happen in the IEP. just for your own information. And we're good with the chat. If everybody's thumbs up, we're good, everybody? All right. I don't want to toggle. I'm sorry. I would toggle between, but my computer, I don't trust it. So how can a student be supported in the general education program? The accommodations, and tell me yes or no if you've heard of these. Accommodations, just say yes or no if you've heard of these in the IEP. Modifications, when determined by case conference committee. Have you guys heard about assistive technology or AT? Paraprofessional support and co-teaching. Any of those that you haven't heard about, you can put in the chat, or that you want more information, or any of you guys that work in a co-teaching environment would be helpful to know. I'm just curious where we are with that, because accommodations and modifications are different, and I want you to know what that means. And assistive technology, just these words. Sometimes these words, the vocabulary, there's a lot of jargon in special education, and I just want to make sure everybody has those down. Katie.
So right now, everyone's saying yes, basically to all of those.
Awesome. Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Just want to make sure. I just want to make sure that we have all of that down. Okay, so
And
we're
we
going to talk about, I'm sorry?
We have someone who co-teaches Earth, Space Science, and Business Math.
Awesome. That's great. So they're in a co-taught setting. I love that. I co-taught in science as well. I co-taught in 7th grade. So I was a special education teacher and she was a general education teacher, and we had an assistant in the class as well. And so when we would do stations, we each would have a station, and there would be 3 station rotations, and it was a really nice way to do that co-teaching. So that was really helpful. All right. So we're going to kind of talk on this a little bit. So this is potential ineffective utilization for you guys. So I just want to know also, this is another maybe chat opportunity. If you're always maybe grading papers, or always making copies, or always decorating bulletin boards, that might not be the best use of your time, depending. You know, you can do that for sure to help the teachers, but you have other things that you could do for students. So I think that sometimes if you're just there to just make copies or things like that, then that we really want to work with students, right? So those are the potential ineffective utilization. We know that we don't want the paraprofessionals to be the direct communicator to the parents, because it really should go through the teacher to make sure that you know, the right communication goes through the teacher first, and the para doesn't have to have that responsibility to always update the parents. It really should be that teacher doing that. Of course, you guys could talk together. My paraprofessionals and I would talk together, and then I would communicate to the parent what the para told me, but I would be the direct link to that one. And then removing the students all the time, we can talk about that one. So that's a behavior thing. So this is my scenario. So if a student's acting out, and then you're like, just can you take them for a walk, or just, you know, do that. And that happens sometimes, right? Like you're like, okay, you got to take them for a walk, or take them out of here for a second. And if you're always doing that, we have to think about the root cause, like what's going on. So another way to look at that would be, what skill can we teach the student that he can advocate for himself? So if a student's starting to get agitated, instead of just saying, can you take them out of here for a second? Another way the teacher should do it would be, let's teach them some coping mechanism or coping skills to do this. And let's teach it when they're not getting upset. So we should be teaching these skills when the student's not upset already. We should be teaching them how to do this before they get upset. And so that when they do, that hopefully they can use those skills. Or we're going to teach them. I was in a classroom the other day, and a student, one of her goals was to ask for help before she gets upset, or give a card to an adult, and then she could take a break in the break corner. And so the para was teaching the student how to do that. Like, she was showing her how to use those skills, accessing those skills when she wasn't upset. And it was really great, because it was very effective, and and she was able to use that when she was getting upset. They had some data to prove that. But at the beginning of the year, she was always just out of her desk, or falling on the ground, or getting really angry and doing all these things. And so that was a great way that the teacher and the paraprofessional worked together, teaching the student the skill that they needed to ask for help before, you know, when she was not upset. And then she practiced it a lot. It was in a life skills classroom. And then I got to see her ask for help from the para an appropriate way, and she had access to that. So I think that's just a great way to teach a skill instead of always just saying, okay, just can you get them out of the class before, when something escalates, thinking about how can we do whatever we need that student to learn that skill. We need to practice that in the classroom when the student is not at that crisis level or at that red. Is there anything in the chat? Are we good? Anybody have any comments or questions about that one?
Nope, there was nothing.
Okay.
I was just curious if a lot of people, are into having to remove kids, and if so, how do you handle that when you're out with the student and they may be escalated? Do you need help, suggestion, pointers on that? Because that would be something good to know as we go into our next training sessions as well.
That is a great one. I've just seen it a lot in my classroom. And if anybody can use a chat, or you could unmute if you want to unmute to talk. I see one comment, I think. I can't see it, but
Radios.
oh, radios. Okay, so they use the radios to get help. All right. And if you guys have any comments on that or thinking about that, but it's just helpful to teach students the skills before that crisis level, of course. And it is good to have a person in the room to help the teacher, but always removing the student at the time it's just really hard. It's really hard on the parent. It's really hard on everybody, as I'm sure you guys know. So Special Education 101, what do paraprofessionals need to know, understand, and do? We need to talk about goals, progress monitoring, accommodations, who, what, when, and under what conditions, behavior intervention plans, confidentiality, and disability-specific information. So these are the kind of the things that we can go over with our students. There are things called IEPs at a glance. And if you guys don't know what those are, hopefully you can, or you can ask your teacher for those. Those are your students' goals and their IEPs. My paras always knew what our students' goals were. I think that that's really important. And if you don't have access to that, I think that that is something that you can, because you're working with the kids, that you need to know what their goals are, when they should know it and why, and what kind of things you need to work on with them. I think that that's just really important. But they're called IEP at a glances, and teachers can print them out for you so you can just see their goals and kind of their accommodations and what they need in their classrooms. So that is just something that I think that I would advocate for as a para or an IA, to make sure that I know. So hopefully you guys all have access to those, but in my building, I'm not sure if all of my paras really knew to ask that. I shared it myself because I know that we are a team and we need to work together, but I don't think all districts think about that kind of thing. So, and a teacher would definitely be able to share that with you, but if you wanted to ask, I think that's something that you could ask about. Just say, can I see the goals, or can I see an IEP at a glance? Because it has my students' accommodations, it has our students' goals and what they're doing and what baseline they're at. So what percent of the skill that they know now, and what do we need to get to? So that's all the information that's very helpful for a para, I believe. Also, if your student has a behavior intervention plan, that's important for everybody to know on the team. That's another thing that I think that you should be able to look through and to know what that is. So there's a person coming in. There's still people coming in. So the guidance is the teacher determines the tasks and the functions. So I, as a teacher, I have to do the lesson plans. I need to decide what materials are necessary for the lesson. I need to know, the location and the services and supports. Do I have to pull these kids to the back group and I'm going to have somebody work with them? I need to do all of that. I need to do the progress monitoring and assessment. So I had binders for my students. My paras knew where my binders were. I had my goals on the front page, and I had all of the worksheets or the things that I needed them to work on behind it. That's how my structure worked. My paras were able to do that because I planned all of those things. And then they were able to take, like Katie said, somebody did every week, they took data. My students, we did that on a Friday. So every Friday, my paras and I would break up, and we would have 3 students each, and we would take data on their goals. So the paraprofessional is able to provide the academic support in a small group, behavior support, provide accommodations, and what's accommodation that we usually do in a group, well, a lot of times we would read directions. So that would be an accommodation that the student has in the IEP. So I could do it, or the parent could do it. You could read the test to them, or I can read the test to them. That's fine. If you have a small group, the parent can help with that, because that is an accommodation in the IEP oftentimes, that students have to be tested in a smaller group. So maybe the assistant will help with that. You provide supervised instruction, group or individual, and you can collect data. So you can collect data as a para. We had conversations. I started teaching 20 years ago. And so it was the pairs were kind of like, what am I able to do, or what am I not able to do according to the law and according to our school, like what should we do? And they can take data, they can collect data. I showed them how to do it. I was very specific. On our goals, we were all a team, we all worked together, and they really liked helping with that kind of thing. So as long as I taught them how to do it, they were great with that. So, and then we had discussions on Fridays about students. So that is some guidance and supervision, but making sure your teacher does all of the things on the left, and then you're able to help with all of the things on the right. And if you do not feel comfortable, or you do not know how to do it, please ask your teacher to explain it, or or just say it. And there's some things in the chat I can't read it. Katie, is there anything? Are they kind of commenting?
Yeah, so a couple of them are just commenting that they do have access to the IEPs, and
Great.
a couple have, maybe one, they have like a binder with the students' IEPs, and they have to, acknowledge that they've seen them.
That's great. Yes, because legally you're supposed to have, the teacher gives it to the team, and everybody's on that team. So I think that's great that's working out, because I don't think that's always the case in every district. So that's great that the teachers are it sounds like very organized, and you guys are in on it. And if you're not, please don't be afraid to say, I would like to know what our goals are so I can help work on this. I can advocate for that. So the academic cycle of support, and this is when the teacher develops the plan, the teacher models the instructional strategy for the teacher's aide, or the IA. The teacher assigns the teacher aide a role in instruction. The teacher aide carries out the instructional role. The teacher gives the teacher aide feedback, and the teacher aide gives the teacher feedback about the student, and it kind of just is a cycle. And this is what I would always do again. And it sounds like some of you guys that have your binders, you have the goals. If you're doing a reading strategy, or if you're doing a math strategy, and you're watching the teacher model whatever it is that they're doing, and then you break it down to a group of students, because you're the pair in the classroom, you see how the teacher did it. So you're going to do it the same way. You're going to do it a different way. You're going to model it again. So you're going to deliver some of that specially designed instruction for those students. And then you do that in the small group, and you're working on those problems. And then you're able to do that under the supervision of the teacher. Then you can give the teacher the feedback of how the student did. And I'm sure that's what you probably do. And then the teacher should take that data and use that for, to monitor that progress. And then you can decide if you're going to keep going or not. But really, you have a baseline data from the goals. The students have goals in their IEPs, so there should have baseline. So if the students, are only able to complete 20% or 2 out of 10 multiplication problems, and they need to get to 70%, the para should know that goal in the classroom, and you should know where the student is, and then where they need to go, and then have those conversations with the teacher to be able to reach those goals in a perfect world with, a lot of time. But really, that should be kind of what you need to know as the pair. What's the goal? Where are we at? And how are we going to get there? That is the academic cycle of support. And then the teacher can decide, is this working for the student, or do I need to change the instructional strategy for those students? And then we can kind of do it again in that way. Do you want to add anything, Katie? I know you're unmuted. I wasn't sure.
Nope, I was trying to stay muted. I am so sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. That's how I know sometimes when you need to add. And if anybody needs to ask a question or throw something in the chat, please do. So for the goals, every student has annual goals in his or her IEP. Some schools do it by their birth date. Some schools do it a different day. So every year a student has an annual case conference. I don't know if any of you guys get to join those annual case conferences or not. Sometimes they do have pairs join, and sometimes they don't, depending on if you're a one-to-one, with the student, you probably will, but sometimes they just ask for the teacher asks for your input, and then you don't have to go to the meeting. There's, either way, it's up to the parent, it's up to the team. Goals have to be measurable and specific to the student's needs. So again, like I said, they have to work on a certain skill. Every student has different goals. They should have different goals every year. And then you can understand your role in helping the student meet their goals. So what are some goals? We're going to stop. I've talked a lot. I'm going to have you guys use the chat and tell me what are some of the goals that you see that you're helping your students reach when you're working together? What are some things that you work on?
Alana, I know at the high school level, we do a lot with organizational skills, with getting them to use a calendar and monitor their study habits, so to speak.
That's great. Okay, so at the high school, I think that's a huge one, and you probably have multiple students working on the same type of goals in the high. As they get older, I feel like people say it's harder to get very specific with the goals, but a lot of the kids have the same sort of, and yes, that makes sense. Thanks, Bill.
So Alana, we've got kind of all over the place. We've got some who are tracking academic goals and behavior goals, and then some with social and emotional goals. So we're getting everywhere. A lot of fluency goals, and actually 3 more behavior goals. So a lot with behavior and the academic goals.
Lots of behavior and academic goals. That's great. Yeah, I mean, yeah. And I always see that behavior. It's interesting because I always wondered if I track it, if kids are behaving differently as in recess versus PE versus math. It's interesting when you look at that data. But thanks, guys. There's tons of different things you can help with. I love that. So progress monitoring is what happens when you have to do it regularly to see if students are on track for meeting their yearly goals. So that means that your teacher is the one that puts everything in the IEP. You can give them data. You can help with giving them data, which is great when you do help your teacher out with that. But the teacher is the one that puts that in the IEP, and you have to do it every reporting period. So typically 4 times a year is legally what the teacher has to do. So she says, I'm progress monitoring right now. That's what it means. She's using her computer. She's using the data that you tracked and that she tracked or he tracked. I always say she, I'm sorry. She or he tracked, the teacher tracked, and they put it in the IEP system. So you are, again, and you guys are already doing this, you're helping to collect data, and you're having assistance or adjustments needed to keep progress on track. So if something's not working, if you said that you're working on fluency, and if you're working on integrity, or if you're working on you have a specific reading program that you're working on, and it's not working, then maybe you're going to have to tell the teacher, this isn't working, they're not meeting their goal, and then the teacher can say, okay, we're going to try to add something else to this reading program, or we're going to add maybe the computer part of this, and we're going to have the student go on there for longer, or I'm going to have to pull them, by myself and reteach it. So progress monitoring, that's what it is. And according to Article 7, which is, again, the law in Indiana, we have to do it every time the student gets a report card. The teacher has to monitor the progress in the IEP system. And the para or the assistant should not be putting it in to the system, but you can give the data to the teacher to help the teacher out. So that is what progress monitoring is. Does anybody have any questions of that, or is that new, or is that something that you probably already have known about? But the teacher does have to do that with the report card. And I'll let Katie, if anyone has any comments on that, I'll have her share that out. But I just wanted you to know that that's what progress monitoring is. And that's a requirement by law that the teacher has to do, and the para gets to help with that.
We just had some comments that they were helping with communication goals. And one para commented, I'm assuming para could be a teacher because we have some of those in here as well, that they're just helping students, I think, if I'm understanding right, in general, who don't speak English, because they have many who don't speak English. And so communication is very difficult for those students.
Yes, that's huge. That is a huge one. Yeah, those multi-language learners. Yes, that's great. Thank you, Katie. So accommodations, and everybody said that they knew what accommodations were. So we don't have to spend a ton of time on these, but these are just, I just want you, according to the law, what it says, it's supports and services that provided to help a student access the general education curriculum and demonstrate learning. So they're listed clearly in the IEP or the IEP at a glance. So if you have access to the IEPs, which is awesome, or IEP at a glance, or if you don't, then you could just ask your teacher. She or he will be happy to help you with that. They have a list of accommodations in there. Paraprofessional roles, they provide opportunities for students to demonstrate learning, and then they do not change the instructional level, the content, or the standards. So I'm going to give you an example of some accommodations. If I had a student and I have a blind low vision student, and this does not always work, I know that. So if you have to, sometimes magnifying it doesn't help. But say a student is helpful, it's helpful to magnify their worksheet. I had a student with blind low vision that it did help that student. I know some students it doesn't, but it was the same worksheet as the person next to them. I just had to make it bigger for them. That's an accommodation. I didn't change anything about the worksheets. I just made it physically bigger. Sometimes a student has maybe ADD or ADHD, or maybe just a hard time paying attention in general, just based on their disability. So they had to sit next to my desk, okay? Or they had to sit, they had to have like a cubicle around them. I didn't change anything about their work. I didn't change anything about the complexity of the work or made it harder or easier, but that's an accommodation for that student, because that student was able to access the same work as everybody else, but the accommodation was that they had to have preferential seating, which that's what it meant in that IEP. That's an accommodation. Is there any other accommodations that you provide for your students like that you see in your IEP at a glance? Or that you can think about, like I just said, making something bigger for a student, changing their seat. What other things have you seen in the IEPs that would be an accommodation?
So we have some using Snap and Read, or some programs similar to Snap and Read. And I know
Awesome.
a lot of schools have put those on computers or laptops for all students, so all students can access that too. Clicker. I'm unfamiliar with Clicker.
Yes, I've seen Clicker. Does anyone want to, do you guys want to explain that one? Do you guys, whoever wrote that?
Having a lamp available, all capital L, capital A, that lamp, not.
It's a communication board.
Right, yeah, I was just making sure that everyone knew that.
Yeah, it's a communication board. I got to see it in action the other day. I used core vocabulary, and then I got to see a lamp, so that was cool.
We'll translate some writing programs. It looks like speech to text sorts of things. Safe
Perfect.
spaces, multiplication charts, hundreds charts for sure.
Perfect. Yeah, so accommodations, you guys hit it right on the head, which is great, because sometimes we get them mixed up. But yes, anything that will just keep even the playing field. It doesn't change the instructional level. It doesn't change the content. It doesn't change the standards. The students are able to access those accommodations. They have to have them because they're listed in their IEP. Like Katie said, everybody can probably use Snap and Read. It should have to be something that has to be listed into your IEP, because it's good for anybody, right? But if it is listed in your IEP, then you have to provide that accommodation. But yes, some accommodations are good for all kids. So that's always an interesting subject. That's a different conversation. So behavior intervention plans, or BIPs. How many of you guys, thumbs up or thumbs down if your students have BIPs? Just curious, just wondering about that while I talk through this. So these are created on a functional behavior assessment. So there's an assessment out there that we give students that have these. This is only for students that have behavior that impede their learning. That's what it says in the law. So it is not for every student. It really is for those students that we've done lots of different things and nothing's really happening. So we have to tailor it to the specific student. They're not the same as a classroom or behavior management program like PBIS. I don't know if anybody's used PBIS in their school, but students that have behavior and intervention plans also can do PBIS. They're also able to do that, but legally we have to follow their behavior intervention plan. It identifies the behavior and outlines a specific measurable plan to change, increase, or decrease the incident of the behavior. So if your student has a behavior intervention plan, we want to decrease the amount of time that they hit other students, or we want to increase the amount of time that they keep their hands to themselves. So we have to do all of these things to help with our behavior intervention plan. We have outlined specific expectations for managing behavior in both calm and crisis. And kind of like what I talked about, we have to teach those skills when they are in the calm, not always in the crisis. Like, remember when you see them escalating, and then you're like, wait, you have to use your coping skills. You have to practice that when they're fine. We have to practice using the coping skills. We have to practice asking for a break. We have to practice asking me to go to the sensory room when they're calm. That is the hope. That's the skill. And then hopefully when they escalate, then they're going to be able to utilize those tools when they get into crisis. So we have to practice those as pairs and teachers when they're in the calm. Additional training or conversations may be required to understand each student's specific BIP or behavior intervention plan. That's the name, they call them BIPs, if you guys have heard of that. Because if you have a student that doesn't have a behavior intervention plan, you probably need a little bit more help to, what do I do when this happens? And it should be outlined in the IEP. That's what a behavior intervention plan is. If you don't have a student that has one, you might have one. So this is just important knowledge to know. Katie, I know there's some things in the chat. I'm not sure. Are they just saying thumbs up and thumbs down?
Yep. So almost everyone, there is one thumbs down.
Okay.
But almost everyone has students on a behavior plan. But I
Oh,
will
wow.
say we have some paras who are working with like preschoolers, and then we have those adult transitions too. So I feel like we have, such a wide, amazing range of paras.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, and if you already know about this, great. And just, that's great because this is part of the law and this, and if you have any comments or anything, please add to the chat for me. And if you don't, we're just trying to give you the knowledge of it, because you could have, if you don't have a student with behavior intervention plan, you might get one, or you might get, in the future. So just know that that's where you find it. You find it in the IEP. And if you collect data for your behavior, I'm sure you're helping your teacher with this behavior plan, if you know it or you don't know it, because they're using it to update this plan that we have to do every year with the case conference. It's part of their IEP. And confidentiality, we know that students and the parents have a right to privacy. The FERPA is the law. We protect the dignity of students and their families, family history, traumatic experience, educational and medical information in the IEPs or ILPs. Those are the language plans if you have students on those. It extends to all settings, so after school, community activities, specific to adults who have academic reasons for working with students. So just thinking about when you have those conversations, and I've done this by accident. I'm gonna say, I would talk about a student, and I'm not in a bad way at all, just like a funny thing that happened. And I'm like, oh, there's community people around. Probably don't say their name, don't say their names. And sometimes you don't do it on purpose, but kids are fun at school, and you come home and you have these things and you sometimes talk about it. But just remembering that confidentiality is really, really important for our students. This is one that we had in our school. We could not post about students on social media. I don't know if you have a district policy on that, but and we were always taught that we were not able to accept them as a friend request until they graduated. I have students who now, I told you I started teaching 20 years ago. I have students, I think my oldest student is 32. I don't know how, because I'm 35, so I don't know how that, I don't know how that happened. I'm just kidding. But so so now they're my friends on social media because they're like 30 now. And it's just funny because, yeah, but when they were young and their parents would try to ask me to be, their friend. And I'd say, I can't, I'm your student's teacher. And then they were really nice about it. It wasn't a big deal. But sometimes that could be a little bit gray area. And our district did have a policy on that. I'm not sure if your guys did or if yours did, Katie, but it was a long time ago. So it was Facebook mostly. Now there's more social outlets, but yeah, we couldn't take pictures of our students because it was very much, their parents had to sign off on those things. So just watch out for those kinds of things. There was a couple teachers that did get in trouble for being friends with them in our district. And that was something that we talked about at our staff meetings and things like that. Do you have anything to say on that one, Katie, or?
No, I just think that those are great reminders, Alana. And I know I taught I spent all 18 years teaching in the same district, and it was a very small district, and it was the district where I graduated high school from. So it can be so hard to separate those relationships. But setting those boundaries is okay in situations like this.
Yeah. You want to be their friend. I mean, you're like, you're nice, it's great, but then you're like, oh, I probably should wait. And I did, and now I am friends with some of those people that are like 30 now. So it's kind of funny how long you've been teaching. It just depends. And then your students are like grown people. So these are just a little bit of examples. If a student's teacher wants to report how Jimmy did in music class, just don't do it in the hallway in case somebody can hear, or another para or somebody else wants to know what's wrong with that student. Just making sure that those do not happen. Any information about when you're a teacher, like I think the teacher's lounge is sometimes a hard one because people do kind of vent about their day and things like that. And we were taught, that just shouldn't be a place where you talk about things like that, like it's kind of gossip. So it is an example of breaching the confidentiality. If you're in a teacher's lounge and you're talking about these things and other teachers don't have these students in their class, if they have them in the class and you're talking about a problem, that's a different subject, but not to be like the gossip part or vent about it with people's names in it, because you never know who, and this has happened too. Two teachers were talking, and then there was one of the paras was actually an aunt of a student, and they didn't know it. And then the aunt was very upset because the teachers were talking about her nephew, and so they got in trouble about that because it wasn't on purpose, but they didn't realize who was in the room. And so it's just an example of a breach of confidentiality. So then it was kind of a bigger deal than it should have been, because she was very upset because they were talking about, her family member. So yeah, and again, like whenever you want to share a funny story, but something that happened at school, maybe leave names out of it and just talk about the situation. Not because again, it could be a breach of confidentiality if something gets back to the family. That's just a reminder of things that could happen in schools. That one I feel like, I didn't know they all highlighted like that. All right, so this comic is Let's Be Clear, and then the three surgeons, and I don't know if you can see the guy with the feet hanging like off the table. It says, and that is why we lift on three, because none of them were giving the clear directions, and everybody was kind of not sure when they were going to lift the person, and they fell off of the table. So we're just talking about communication and being explicit with our communication. It is really key. I think most of our frustrating at work is lack of understanding surrounding what is expected of us. John Maxwell, I really like that quote, because if you as a para, I don't know if you've ever felt like this. Have you ever felt frustrated because you don't really know what your role is or what you should be doing in a certain class? Or maybe it's different because you teach in a middle school, like Katie and I, and the students had to go through 7 different classrooms. So maybe it was very clear what your role was in one class, but in another, you weren't really sure what to do. So you were just kind of hanging around. I'm not sure, and I can't really see the chat, but if you've ever had that frustration, I'm sure, unless the teacher, because you have to make sure you have that communication with the teacher. Is there anything, if there is, Katie, just interrupt me, but okay. But sometimes I think that could be the hard part if we don't communicate with each other, because we have to communicate with students and your families. We have to know the protocol, like what happens with that, teachers, administrators, other support services and staff. I always met with my teacher or my paras every Friday before school. I had like we had a 30-minute window and we would talk about the week, or we would talk about what's happening next week. So that would be my little thing that I would do with my paras, because I knew that it's really important that we communicate. So if you don't have something like that, or if you feel like you need something like that, you could advocate for yourself to say, you have 10 minutes to talk about whatever, maybe on a Thursday or something. I know school is very busy, but it is really important, those kinds of things.
Hey, Alana, I
Yeah.
was just going to comment. I'm sure he won't mind because I'm going to call him out, but Bill
Yeah.
made a great comment, and his comment was that sometimes there are teachers who aren't really sure how to utilize paras. And I know from an earlier comment, one of the teachers is in here to learn more about how to utilize paras.
Oh, that's
So,
awesome.
I'm just wondering, like, if you're in that position, and your teacher isn't sure, I'm sure that's an awkward conversation to have, to try to say, hey, here are some places you could go for resources. But you can always offer our Padlet link, and just say, I attended this webinar. It was the best webinar I've ever been in. But they gave us some really great resources. I was able to talk with other paraprofessionals and see how they're being utilized in their districts, or in their roles, and just say, I thought this Padlet contained a lot of great ideas. So I wanted to pass along. I didn't know if, you would like it, or if you know someone who would like it. So
I think that's a great idea. And I do think I agree. I think for the teachers in here, that having the pairs help with data is super helpful. I think having pairs help with small groups is super helpful. And not just students maybe with IEPs, but maybe pull a couple students with IEPs and a couple students without, that are just at risk or need a little extra help, extra practice, and maybe switch it up. Maybe one time the teacher can work with that small group, and the para can maybe do a Kahoot or something with the big group to help with a review. There's a lot of different ways. And actually in our co-teaching Padlet, there's other strategies to use too. But I know this one isn't really tailored to that, but I think that's a great question, Katie. That's a great idea and question. Are you adding something to the chat? I feel like you're adding something.
I'm not adding. We have someone with a name issue, and so I'm emailing Rosalind and Gail right now, because I won't remember if I don't do it right now.
No, perfect. I just didn't know if you had anything in there, but we do have some resources. So at the end, there's our names on here, Katie's and I's. If there's a teacher on here that wants some resources or ideas, we can also send that to you individualized, because I know that this isn't about that really, but we like to help with whatever you need. So that would be great. So classroom routines and scheduling is really helpful for communication, individual student progress, roles and responsibilities, how to request assistance in emergencies. Those are kinds of things that the teachers and the paras can talk about. I need to know in my classroom, if I had paras in my classroom, this was my number one rule as a teacher. I would say, when I'm modeling something, my paras are, I don't want them to talk to like a sidebar conversation to the other students, because the students wouldn't hear what I'm saying, my teaching, but you have to communicate that to your paras, or the people that you work with as a gen ed teacher or the special education teacher, because the paras won't know what your expectations or your rules are unless you have those conversations. So that's something that I think is really important to communicate to my staff and to my team, because they know, oh, Miss Harveth, when she's modeling this math problem, none of us can talk. We have to sit on our hands, actually. So that was kind of my thing. But I can't just assume that other people in my classroom know what to do. I have to talk about that out loud. So those kind of communications should happen with the paras and the teachers. And again, we talk about collecting data. If the paras help me collect data, I'm going to have some data team meetings, and maybe I'm going to have my paras in on it. Like, these are where my students are. This is where we're trying to get to. And we're going to have some of those conversations. And what roles and responsibilities do I want you to do in this class to help me, and how to request assistance again in emergencies. All of those things are ways that the the pairs and the teacher need to talk throughout of those. And if you don't have any of those, if you can advocate and ask for your teacher, how can we have, like, every Tuesday, can we meet for 10 minutes and talk about some of these things? I think that's a great idea to do that, because everybody has a lot going on. Google Doc, and a lot of districts probably have that. I'm gonna assume. Sometimes instruction.
Is Alana frozen for anyone else? Okay. Well, let's see. I will do my
Am I frozen,
best.
Kate?
Oh, hey, Alana, you were completely frozen.
I was frozen for how long? Oh, okay. Am I still? So who knows what I just said?
Please don't test us over it.
No, I won't. Okay, so no, sorry. If
We
you guys have
got
to
to
hear
the Google Docs. You kind of cut out then.
Okay, so then you have Google Docs, or I would email my paras so we could be on the same page. One of my paras had a one-on-one student that she had to have a notebook for to tell, like, what happened throughout the day. And so then I had to initial it so I would know what was going on through the day. That's another way to communicate. Some paras get to go to the grade level meetings or student meetings, and some do not. But these are possible ways to communicate if you need them. Clipboards, little Post-it notes, charting, or even face to face, like I said, advocate and say, can I just talk to you for a few minutes in the hallway while you're standing there, and things like that. But those are just some ways to talk to the teacher, and the teacher can talk to the paras, some communication. But I do think that there needs to be some communication going around with the students and the assignments. Sorry about that, my computer, I don't know. Expectations for, hopefully the teacher's clear for the paraprofessional, the roles, and expectations for communication between the para and the teacher. So all of those different ideas that we had, hopefully you guys have some ways that you communicate with your teacher. And if you don't, maybe you can say, oh, I bet a Google Doc would work really well, or maybe I should try this, or maybe next year, if you have another teacher, whenever you want to do this. But I do think that thinking about what other people do, or thinking about what you do now, how could you do it differently? Or if it's working, you can keep using what you use. But there's just some different ideas for how to communicate with the teacher. And Katie, I'm gonna say that if anybody says anything in the chat, I can't see the chat, so sorry guys. Okay, good. All right. So I'm just thinking about your day. Do you know what is expected of you at all times? Consider it. Where do you go to provide services? What are you expected to do at that time? To whom do you report in each setting if you have to? And how do you communicate with a teacher and or other related services providers of the data? What is your student expected to do with or without assistance? Again, if a student's able to do something with assistance, that should be on the data sheet. Obviously, if it, how many prompts that the student needs, that could be something you can report on. That's very helpful for tracking the data in the IEP. And hopefully your teacher tells you what do you need to document, and how and when, and what data will you collect, and how often. So all of those things are things that you could ask the teacher if you don't know. Like if you're like, you know what, I bet I could help with data. Maybe I should ask the teacher if I could help with this. This is how I'm going to ask her. Or maybe I need to be more clear on what are my students' goals? What are their baseline goals, and where are we going to go? Maybe I'll ask the teacher if I don't have access to the IEP, can I see the IEP, or can I see the goals of that? That could be something that that you could ask and advocate for if you need it as a para to help with your job. All right, and then communicate positively. We all team members are aware of key information. We work together. I always say we were a team. My paras were the heartbeat of my classroom. I needed them just as much as they needed me. Adults speak to the students and each other in a kind and respectful way. Have those conversations away from students. If you and your teacher do not agree, that's okay, but you have to disagree respectfully, right? That's kind of like, that's the rule. And if you have that, making sure you have those conversations away from those students, and not in front of them. And paraprofessionals follow the guidance of the teachers. The teachers are in charge of the lesson plans and doing all of those things, and you get to just help do those plans and deliver that instruction. And we always say disagreements never occur in front of the students, and I hope that that's the case in your building. You can have disagreements, but respectfully. I always say you don't have to agree with somebody, but do it in a respectful manner away from students. It's just a good reminder. I'm sure you guys know all of that. But it is just hard to do any in front of students. You don't want them in on that. We want to make sure that they can not hear anything like that. But again, you can disagree. It's fine, but you have to work together. So today we covered in a little over an hour, not too long. Today we talked about Article 7, and everybody in the chat, tell me what Article 7 is, because I think I said it a couple times. So this is your exit slip. What is Article 7? We talked about paraprofessionals' roles and responsibilities. IEP basics, like what in the IEPs, we talked about the goals and the progress monitoring. And then communication practices. How do we communicate, where and when? Is anybody putting it in the chat with Article 7? No one yet? Remember I said Article 7 is Indiana's, I'm giving you a starter, a word starter. I'll give you choices if I need to give you choice. Oh, they got it?
Yep, a couple SPED laws and Indiana rights.
Yes, Indiana special education law.
Where paraprofessional is defined. Yes.
Yes. It talks about it has what accommodations are, what paraprofessionals are defined are, but Article 7 is where we get all of our laws. So Indiana has to follow Article 7, all the laws. That's where you would go if you wanted to look at a specific law in Indiana. Awesome. You guys all got an A+. Thank you very much. And then we just talked about the paraprofessional roles and responsibilities, the basics, and some communication practices that we could do.
Hey, Alana, can I just interject one thing? Based on some of the comments, just to be clear, so Article 7 does have the definition of paras, but it also contains kind of like the document that Alana referred to, where it has the different eligibility categories. We have 13 different eligibility categories under federal and state law. And under each eligibility, there is a description of what the eligibility is. There's a description of what has to be considered for an evaluation of that specific eligibility. All of that is also in Article 7. It's everything related to like suspensions and expulsions and timelines. And I'm trying to think, I mean, it's every single thing related to special education and the law. So whenever I oftentimes have districts or teachers reach out to me and they'll ask me a question, something like, is an observation really required if I'm doing an evaluation for a student with autism? And if I didn't know that answer, Article 7 is the first place that I go to, because I want to be sure that, yes, I know exactly what advice I'm giving. So anything related to anything special education is going to be in that Article 7. It also talks about students who are homeschooled, because even though a student is homeschooled, they could still qualify for special education services. So it talks about how to handle those situations. If you ever have a question about it, I'm more than happy to answer it. And if I don't know the answer, I'll go to Article 7 for you and find that answer out.
Yeah, it's just really important to know that it is our law that we have to follow, and everything's in it. And it is online, and there's a lot. There's a little search thing, so you could put the question that you have in there, but it is our special education law that we have to follow, and it talks about what is required in an IEP, all of those things. So we kind of just did the IEP basics, but I just wanted to know if you knew. I just wanted to make sure we knew that Article 7 was our Indiana law for special education and all things that we have to, like Katie said very well.
So Alana, there was also a question about, I just lost it, from Bill, and you can give me a thumbs up or you can unmute. Public and private laws. Do you mean for schools? So private schools are kind of a different beast because they do have I don't want to say some differences, but there are differences in the way that services can sometimes be delivered. Sometimes a student may qualify for an IEP, but if a private school maybe doesn't have a special education program, then parents may deny their child's free and appropriate public education is what we call it. It gets into some really nitty gritty pieces. But if you are homeschooled or you go to a private school, the school district that is your local
Homeschool.
education, what'd you say, Alana?
Homeschool, you're home,
Yeah,
like you're in the
where
bounds.
your address would send you
Yes.
for homeschool, because sometimes people might live in a different town from what the private school is. So it's the town you live in. They would be required by law to do the educational evaluation.
Mhm. Yeah, they have little different laws. I'm glad I have a psych over here, Katie. It's great. Well, thank you guys today. I don't know if there's any more questions. We got through everything. On the left, we wouldn't mind if you would do our evaluation to make sure that we answered some of your questions. I think I've gotten everything. I wanted to give you our emails on the end so that if you have a specific question about what are some different ideas that we can do with pairs in my classroom, please email us, Katie or I, or any, and then we will give you some resources if you're a teacher that wants a specific question answered, or if you're a pair that wants a specific question answered, please. We have resources for you. And you can unmute and ask us questions. We will be here. We both have experience with pairs in our classrooms.
There was a question in the chat that we should have mentioned first thing and totally spaced. Yes, you'll get your certificates in the mail or in your email. And I think last week Rosalind did those for us and she was on top of it. I think she got those out pretty darn quickly.
Katie, is there, I know the para book, I think there's a couple. I don't know how many there is in the office. You want to do that today?
Yeah, go right ahead.
We're going to give a couple books away. If you are a para and want a book, I'm going to let you decide today what we're doing. You're in the office, so you know how many, you know how many we have of those para books?
I would say a couple. I mean, let's do two. And if
Okay.
if something happens and I don't have two, then I will send something else.
Okay. So if you want a book, we're going to just do a random giveaway today of, I'll let Katie pick.
Oh, you're going to let me pick how to do it. Okay. Is today anyone's birthday by chance? I'm going to guess no. Crickets on that one. That was a really good thought on my part.
That was a good thought. I like that.
I know.
I hope they're not here on their birthday, but that would be great.
Let's see. What about the next coming birthday? Does anyone have a birthday this week? And this is the honor system here. What about in the month of February? Does anyone have a February birthday?
Does anyone love Valentine's Day?
Oh, let's see. We've got some February birthdays. That's
Yay!
awesome. Okay. So February birthdays. Let's see. Carrie, Avery, which really isn't Avery. Sherry, Rachel. Oh, wow. February.
How many?
Is a popular month. We have like several.
Oh, okay.
So
I think I might have two of the book. I might have two.
let's see. I think there are like 6. So with as many people that we had on the webinar today, I can do 6 giveaways. Feel free. I'm putting my email in the chat. I want you just to put your, send me your address. And then also with that, will you send me what school you're at? We just like to track what school districts we give stuff to. It's like we just have to have it to turn in. So if you think about it, great. If not, if you forget, absolutely no big deal. But just shoot me an email with your name and good mailing address, and I will get something in the mail to you.
Thanks, you guys. It was a great webinar with a lot of people and a lot of people talking, so I really appreciate that.
And as we think about like our next, I am assuming that several of you have signed up for this series. So if there's something specific that you would like us to answer, I mean, we've got, you know, several more sessions together. Please feel free to reach out to us and let us know, even if it's something that's not on a topic that one of the webinars is in regard to, but it's just something that we can maybe help out with or give suggestions for best practices. We're happy to do that. We have built in some extra Q&A time, but sometimes I know it's better to ask anonymously, especially if there are other people in your building and maybe you don't want to ask a building specific question that way. You can always email us and let us know.
Yes, thank you guys for coming.